We decided to start a second project, scaled from 0 to 1.6 billion in sales within 4 years. Hi, my name is Kai Huang. Grew up mostly in the US, but now I'm in Taiwan, 886 Studios. Currently focused on Ikigai Launchpad. My family moved to the US when I was 4, for me and my brother. I grew up in Mountain View, which is the home of Google. Intel was down the street, Cisco was there, HP. Growing up in that environment, you either meet or know personally a lot of people who have started companies, worked at startups, have been very successful. My dad, who's a business person himself, he said, you know, when you grow up, go work for a big company, get the experience, learn as much as you can. But someday you want to own your own company.
Was that kind of his trajectory too?
It was. He graduated college here and went to work at a big company and eventually started his own company in Taiwan with his brothers. Hardware, not the hardware that we would think about today as in computers, but literally hardware like screwdrivers and you know, tools. They would sell that around the world, the US and the Middle East.
But you kind of skipped that step.
I actually did for a few years.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah, so you know, I don't talk about it a lot, but right after college, went to work at a consulting company. One of the things that I learned a lot on a consulting project, you get in, you don't have a lot of time, you got to learn really fast, and then you got to sound smart, and you got to present to the client, right? And I think those are the skills actually that translated really well, you know, in doing a startup.
Your dad encouraged you to, you know, eventually start your own business. Do you feel like that is a common view for a lot of Taiwanese people to have?
My impression, no. I also think that their generation, they were sort of forced to be more entrepreneurial in many ways, scrappier. That was sort of the rise of what we'll call the first economic miracle in Taiwan. In Taiwan today, there's less of an appetite for that risk-taking, although I think that's changing. At least having grown up in Silicon Valley, and this is an important point, you're okay with embracing failure. We're not trying to fail. I don't want to fail, but if I do, it's okay, as long as I've learned. You know, the first company that I started, we had no idea how to sell the product.
Oh, yeah, that's important.
We had no idea how to sell. We had to sell to this intermediate party who could create the whole solution before that solution could be sold to the final customer.
Do you remember the first time like you pitched? What was that experience like?
Oh, yeah. I definitely remember. It's a very humbling experience for sure, especially your first time. Kind of went in with a, you know, pretty good script in mind, but then all of a sudden people start asking questions and interrupting, and you know, they want to know different things, and they're going to ask hard questions, right? And you won't have answers all the time.
How do you answer a question that you don't have an answer for?
I've had that a lot. The best way is you have to be honest and upfront. Hey, I don't have an answer for you right now. I'm going to get back to you with that. And I think people appreciate the fact that, look, you don't always know everything, and you're willing to admit it, versus I've seen many times, and quite honestly, I've done it. You try to explain things away, and usually that just goes sideways, right?
How many times can you say, I don't know?
and still look credible?
Yeah.
I'd say maybe 3 or 4 times, yeah. Beyond that, then you really just don't look like you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
The lesson for me was that I preferred building a product ultimately where I knew who my customer was and I can reach my customer directly. And so the business after we started was Red Octane, the gaming company. We decided to start that direct to consumer, online, e-commerce. We started off as an online game rental service. We were renting a game called Dance Dance Revolution, and customers were asking us, hey, do you sell the dance pads? And that's how we learned about music games. You know, we thought, hey, these music games are a lot of fun. Why don't they make more of them in the US? We went to the video game publishers in Japan, and they had a lot of music games, a huge variety of them. We said, hey, why don't you bring your music games over to the US? We could make accessories for their games, grow our business. Universally at the time, they told us, we don't think there's a market for music games in the US. And so that was when we said, well, if the big companies in Japan are not going to bring their music games to the US, we can't sell our accessories. So the only way for us to grow our own business is to make our own games. It was a big decision. It was a tough one. The industry was consolidating. We didn't know. We were renting games. You know, we were kind of on the periphery of the industry. Never made games before. So we were like, okay, well, let's give it a try. You know, young and stupid, and you know, let's give it a try. So the first game was a dance game because that helped us sell our dance pads. We decided to start a second project. Eventually became Guitar Hero. You know, Guitar Hero scaled from 0 to 1.6 billion in sales within 4 years. Yeah, it was a pretty crazy 4 years. Financially, it got to a certain point where it was difficult not to sell. You know, sort of taking money off the table, taking a little bit of risk off, right? You know, we could have kept going independently, but what if this thing just failed the next year?
So I think I read somewhere that you sold it to Activision for 100 million. How did you guys celebrate?
How did we celebrate?
Yeah.
That's a good question, actually.
Nice weekend in Vegas?
I didn't do Vegas celebratory until probably like 3 or 4 months later.
Very responsible. That's probably why you were able to make a company. What's it like working with your brother?
Well, I'll start with the negative side because that's more fun, right? We'd be in a meeting like this, we'd be talking, and all of a sudden, what the hell are you talking about, right? We just start screaming at each other. And there'd be other people in the room, but, we didn't care. It's just because we're so used to screaming at each other, right? And it wasn't until one day one of our employees took us aside and said, hey, when you guys start fighting in meetings like that, to us, it's like mommy and daddy are fighting again. And they don't know they're like, we don't know who to listen to, right? That was a big lesson.
Is he Guga or Didi?
He's Guga.
He's Guga.
He's older, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I was the CEO and he was the VP of business development. That also added to the dynamic, right? But the positive side is that we intuitively just trusted each other. We also knew that we can argue. Maybe we wouldn't talk to each other for 2 days, but then like on the third day, we're kind of back to normal. We don't have to apologize. You just sort of understood. Pre-COVID in the US, a lot of what I was doing was mentoring founders in the Bay Area where I was from. And I think that's one of the very unique parts of Silicon Valley. Founders there, especially founders that have exited, are almost always willing to give back, not just in capital or money, but also in time. Like, I'm willing to mentor you. And I don't really see that in a lot of other startup ecosystems. Taiwan has a tremendous amount of wealth. The first economic miracle has generated a ton of wealth. But honestly, most of the world, and certainly through Asia, a lot of that wealth is concentrated in what I'll call family offices. Families who started big companies and conglomerates and have made a ton of money. And so the wealth distribution is not as wide. And so that level of mentorship and giving back isn't as broad as it is in Silicon Valley. The breadth happens in stock and equity distribution. If I'm an early employee in Silicon Valley, I'm getting a lot of stock. And when the company goes IPO, my stock is worth a lot. If you're a tech startup and you've gone IPO, all of your first 300 employees are millionaires or deca millionaires, right? And all of those people, opportunity to give back and angel invest. In Taiwan, early employees, some kids don't even want the stock, right? They prefer the cash. And so when a company does well, the money gets concentrated in less hands. It's not that they don't want to help, but because the money is tied up in a single family, a lot of that wealth, which means that there aren't a lot of other people who are willing to spend the time or have money to angel invest. For me personally, one of the best ways I think I can contribute and give back is helping the Taiwan startup ecosystem. Not a politician, I'm not going to run for office here, but hey, startup ecosystem and trying to help mentor young entrepreneurs and founders to create the next unicorn.
I guess that means that you had some sort of connection to here when you were growing up. Was there any other idea that, I'm Taiwanese or my parents are Taiwanese when you were in the States?
Never thought about it, quite honestly. No. I wish I could say I did.
Yeah, you don't have the ROC flag in your room. Where's your tattoo?
Yeah, I don't. I knew at some point that I would want to spend more time in Taiwan. Most of my family is still in Taiwan. 8 siblings on my dad's side, 7 siblings on my mom's side. My brother's we have 45-ish cousins. Yeah, it's a big family.
It's a clan.
But during COVID, came back to Taiwan. Still chaos back in America. Schools were still closed. A lot of people were not wearing masks and defiant, and what was supposed to be a 3-month summer vacation became a year. During that time with the COVID refugees being here, there was a lot of talent that had come from overseas. So brought together a group of friends. We were all Taiwanese, 12 partners. All 12 partners have started companies and have sold them and have exited, all in the US. We started 886 Studios. We bring in super smart founders who are interested in starting their own companies, and we just kind of workshop these ideas. We help them get off the ground and at some point spin them off into their own company.
Have you noticed any mindset differences because you're working with Taiwanese founders?
There are some differences. Silicon Valley, we have a term, failing fast. Failing fast is good because if the company, an idea, a product doesn't work, kill it after 2. Free up those resources, start another company, and maybe you'll find the next big idea. Failing fast is less prevalent here. Appetite for failure is lower. Companies would rather sort of stay alive. In Silicon Valley, we call these the walking dead. They're still surviving, but they're not going anywhere. That tends to happen more here in Taiwan. I think primarily it's probably a face thing. Silicon Valley has just built up that acceptance. Look, I'm going to go all in on this, and I'm willing to take the risk that it's going to fail. The second thing, a lot of the founders, the natural inclination is, well, let's start here. Let's build our business, and if it works, we use this as a stepping stone to go to a bigger market. US, Europe, Southeast Asia, right? And that's a very common mindset. It can be very limiting. Taiwan's too small a market. You need to be thinking about big markets, a global market. In my experience, no matter how big or small the market is, it's never easy. You still have to build the same infrastructure. I still need salespeople, business development, marketing. Hey, I set all of that up and then I got to go to a different market, right? And then you start over again. If you're going to go to the trouble setting up all that infrastructure and try to sell into a market, you might as well go into a market that has bigger scale opportunity. Do I want to play the slot machine where I can win $100 or win $1 million?
Is the kind of a hindrance to that like a language thing, or people feel like, where would I go besides here? Maybe China?
Language certainly is one part of it. It's just natural to think, well, I'm just more comfortable, let's say, in the Chinese language versus English language. But what ends up happening is they end up staying here. China's its own beast of a market, I think. Even though the language is similar, the business culture is very, very different. In fact, I think it's easier for Taiwanese companies to go to the US than it actually is to go to China.
Oh, really?
But I think the language thing tends to keep some of the Taiwanese founders from saying, let me start, let's say, in the US. And that's why we encourage all of our founders to do that. Thinking beyond Taiwan and thinking bigger.